Greetings and welcome to this episode of Everyday Enchantment. I am your host, Stacey Andon, and today I have an amazing guest with me to talk about the ordinary and the extraordinary at the end of life. So, not a lot of people are talking about the whole sacred, holy, messy experience of death and dying, and I have a beautiful expert, Dr. Jo Atkins, and she is at home in the sacred and transformational spaces of the dying, which I cannot wait to dive into. And as a professional counselor, speaker, author, she has dedicated 3 decades to working around end of life. So we are going to ask, or I'm going to ask all the questions and see all this beautiful magic she wants to share with us today. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Intro. I'm so glad to be here. I love your background.
Thank you. I know we have a kindred spirit here with the heart. I love it. I love it. I love it. So I just, first of all, I think death and dying is something we're all thinking about, and lots of us have some experience with, but we don't regularly, probably, or maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really regularly talk about it that much. I mean, I don't know. What do you find?
When I go out with people, we talk about it, but I think that's probably because there's an opening. I think lots of times there's not an opening, and gosh, when there is, when somebody like you decides, let's have this kind of conversation, it sparks other conversations. So thanks for your willingness to do this. Yeah.
I just had on, I don't know if you know Belinda Smith, but she was a recent guest, and we were talking. She and I lost our mothers within 3 weeks of each other 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And we kind of had this intertwined, even though it was very different circumstances, this kind of intertwined grieving process, very transparent on the socials. And so we got together to talk about that. I recently, after losing my mother 4 years ago, I just helped my mother-in-law with an unexpected cancer diagnosis this year transition over. I'm not an end-of-life doula, but I feel like I was kind of tapped a little bit to say, hey, how do we, or how will you help make this a sacred transition for her? And again, I kind of just followed my instincts and my intuition. And it was definitely, again, very transformative for me to be a part of.
So tell me how. I know you're interviewing me, but I want to know how.
Oh, no, I don't mind. You can interview me too. I love that. So interestingly enough, my mother-in-law, we didn't always get along very well. Like we had our little bumps, but the more that she kind of moved out of the physical form. So she got diagnosed in January. By April, she was gone.
Yeah.
So very quick all of that. And I found that the more she kind of like wasn't as embodied in the physical state, like she was kind of transitioning, that she and I just, there was this forgiveness, this love, this very maternal, like I think she helped me heal some things that I was holding from my own relationship with my mother and then our relationship. And it felt very peaceful. But her husband, my husband's father, who had passed like 8 years before, I kind of served a similar thing. I was in the hospital at the bed, he kept holding on. He kept saying, I'm afraid to let go, and held space for him and all of that things. And so here again, he shows up. I have the ability to channel people like as a medium, although I don't really do that as like professional work, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So he came about 2 weeks before she passed, and he said, look, I'm here. Nope, there's no rush. I just want you to know that she has somebody helping her on the other side. And interestingly enough, I had gone on like a little trip right before she did pass, and it was a full moon. I was down at the ocean, and she said to me, she came to me in a dream. She's like, I'm ready to go. I was like, okay, well, don't go yet, because I need to get back so that I can also just be a support for my husband, who, again, watching his mother, they were so close and very very much special relationship the two of them have. I was like, I want to be able to be there. But I found that it was very peaceful
Mhm.
and very calm, which I think I was when my mother died. I wasn't right near her death or anything. So this in this, she was in a hospice house, so different than being in the hospital with my father-in-law. There
Yes.
was just this calmness and peace that I think maybe I wasn't quite expecting because I think I thought it would be a little bit more, I don't even know exactly the right word to use,
Mhm.
but it just felt like, how do you honor everything that she was carrying, that she lived through, and all of that? I could feel her kind of processing all of that
Mhm.
and just holding the space and offering love, compassion, whatever it was, any kind of energies. I also do lots of work with energy that could help her, again, feel safe to let go, which I think her biggest thing about letting go was with my husband because those two just they really did have a very special relationship.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful. Sounds
Yeah.
really beautiful. I think a couple of things. The person who's dying has clearly they have their own experience,
Mhm.
their own settledness or not. And then the people who are around have their own settledness or not. And
Yeah.
when settledness meets settledness, it's a really interesting soup. When not settled, the person who's dying is not so settled, and the people around them can be. They can
Mm.
still grieve, but they can be settled. Often that can help create space for the dying person to sink in and
Mm.
be tended to in a little bit different way. And sometimes none of that matters.
Yeah.
It's just hard. So
Yeah.
you had an experience where it was gentle, it sounds like, and
Yeah.
fairly peaceful on both sides.
Very much so, and it was funny because I had the beginning of the year, I just lost my gallbladder, so it's like coming out of my own physical healing, and it kind of
Yeah,
was in my own little cocoon, and
yeah,
then she got this diagnosis, and I literally had put kind of my rest of my life because I had already been kind of on hold anyway to do all this caregiving. That was harder when she was grappling with like because she, she first they found the tumor in her
mhm,
colon, then they were like state right like in all of these layers, and I think when she was still living at her house and I was caregiving for her, when she was like, am I, she said to me, I was the person when she's like, am I dying? And I was like, oh my gosh, what do I say? Do I, because I didn't want to be disrespectful to my husband and to his sister, right? But at the same time, she was right there with me wanting to have that kind of conversation.
yeah,
And
she
I was like, ooh, what do I say and how do I say it? And I feel, generally speaking, just being in this world of, being a coach, being an intuitive, what have you, I feel very guided to just trust whatever kind of comes through. But
yeah,
that was a really heavy moment. And it was also a very heavy moment too when she decided to, which she had gotten back in the hospital, her heart was starting to fail. And palliative care got involved, which I'll tell you, Martha Joe, this woman, and her name was Christina, which was the name of a friend of mine who just passed away a couple of years ago, who I have a very tight bond with, even on the other side.
mhm,
She navigated questions about death and dying. It was intense. I mean, we were all really like, I feel like that once all of that was handled and held and walked through, then there was this settledness, right? Then there was this
yes,
peace, but it very much was like, oh, what how my husband's family, I love them dearly, but they didn't necessarily have all of these open conversations. So then you
right,
find yourself in this place,
right.
and again, it's like, "Ooh, okay, well, I'm very willing to go into the raw, messy place." Maybe that's why she decided, she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna talk to you."
Yeah, yeah. There was
Yeah,
something about you that was safe, that she could bring up that question and
yeah,
other questions. And yay for palliative care people that know how, and they do, how to have these difficult conversations. It's
yeah.
important.
It really is because I think that at least what I discovered, and I'm so curious what your experience is, everybody has an opinion about
It's
what the right thing is to do,
yeah, yeah,
right?
true.
And to your point, when people aren't settled, or and again, there's no judgment on anybody. Everybody's in the place where they are, but some people, right, or they don't want to let go, or they want this, or they want that, or whatever the case may be. It can
Mhm,
get really muddled
mhm,
when everybody is like interjecting, especially for the person. And again, I haven't obviously experienced this yet, but the person trying to figure out what is it that I truly want in this
mhm,
moment.
mhm. And sometimes what the person wants and what their body is doing are 2 different things.
Yeah.
And people on the outside can see that and want to interject.
Mhm.
Sometimes that is helpful, sometimes it's not. My
Yeah.
my learning, and it's taken me a long time, it is to always, always, always come back to the person, whether the person who's dying, um, whether we think they understand or not, whether they have dementia or not, whether they've not spoken in 15 days or not, they're running the show. They are absolutely running the show. And we get to get ourselves grounded and settled and be with them as
Mhm.
best we can. And when we can do that and we can let go of expectations, because we do have expectations and we do have wants and we're tired, we want the best for the person and we have a life. We think they're suffering. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. We're suffering. There's a
Mhm.
whole layered and layered and layered experiences of this. That was a terrible sentence, but you know what I mean.
No, but I'm with you. It's
Full and rich
Mhm.
um, and
So do
difficult.
you, when you focus, like when you're helping, are you, like you said, you're primarily focused on the person, but do you offer, like, how do you, I think, like, I'm just curious from all your experience, how do you navigate all those things? Everybody else's expectations, their beliefs that may or may not actually be true, what the person wants.
Yeah.
What have you found is helpful or useful in those moments?
So my job first and foremost is to be grounded and settled. So I've got to show up wherever I am in my I'm going to call it my best self. I don't know that that's really it, but it's my grounded self. I was taught a practice about putting hand on a doorknob and saying a prayer or an intention. Everything that's not serving me in this moment, I'm going to give to this door. I'm going to give to this house, wherever you're walking in, and let the house take care of it. And I'm going to walk in with what I need. So that's the front door, and then I do it again before I go into a person's room if they're not in the home. And it's a coming in. The other practice is imagine that you have wings and bring your wings down to yourself. So bring
Mhm.
yourself down to this self here. Don't extend your energy really far out. You're right here and bring that self in, settled self, and sit and see what's needed. I will often go to the person who's dying. Lots of times that person can't talk by the time I'm there. Sometimes they can. If they can't, I'll come and stand by the bed. Sometimes I have an impulse to touch a hand. Sometimes I just say who I am and then I'm here, and then I go sit. And then there's conversations with family as family comes in. And I this voice that I'm using right now, it's kind of interesting. It's a soft, slow, gentle kind of cadence that
Mhm.
kind of brings the energy in the room down. Sometimes families are, um, it's chaos. They're feeling chaotic inside. There's chaos outside, and having some steadiness in the room. That energy can be settled sometimes and moved, and sometimes what happens is people who are really active and have a lot of energy will then leave the room. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is too something, and they'll go, and the energy shifts. And then the person sometimes will have deeper breaths or different breaths. Um, I don't know, and you just see what I just see what is needed. Um, Uh, uh, I I I walk into rooms now with all of my senses on, and I didn't understand I did that until I understood I did that. So it's what I see, it's what I smell, it's what I hear, it's what I feel on my skin. It's a full body experience walking into a room and noticing, and
Yeah.
with that, you can feel a heaviness in the room. You can feel, well, you have those kind of
Yeah.
senses too. You feel a lot
I
of
get
things.
it.
Yeah,
It's interesting too because my mother-in-law was very close with my dog. I mean, those 2 were like little peas in a pod,
yeah,
and the hospice house let us bring him, and it was interesting. He would meet her energy. I watched it for she was there
yeah,
about 2 weeks, and he would lay at her bed. Sometimes he just laid there, sometimes he was more alert. It was
yeah,
interesting to watch him, to your point, with the
yes,
sensory, right? Like, he probably had less going on than me or anybody else because we have all the thoughts as well too, and it was just so like such a presence,
yeah,
um, in those spaces, and it was interesting too because in Maryland, the weather can be all sorts of it was April, so it could be winter, it could be snowing, it could be 90, you could be having a heat
mm,
wave. But the week, right, leading up to her death, it was this beautiful, warm sunshine. We would open up the doors, and it was interesting to me too that on some occasions when we opened up, like I would just like let all the fresh air come in. She had this beautiful patio, and she would, kind of come back into her physical. Or at least that was my impression.
yeah,
She was kind of somewhere else maybe, and then come back
yes,
to us or back in the physical body. The sunshine would bring it, like
yes,
bring her back. And I'm like, "Of course, who" I mean, to me, it was a beautiful moment. I mean, the sun in the spring, it's not too hot. It was just these like, when you were talking and I don't know if this is what you mean, but when you're talking about extraordinary moments, to me, I find the extraordinary is often so hidden, to your point, in the ordinary.
yes, yes. I agree with that. I want to say that that going and coming that you experienced, not everybody notices that.
Oh,
It is a thing. There's a an awareness that the person has, and sometimes they're away, 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 and they're not going to come back. And other times they're away and uh, hearing everything in the room. I worked with this woman must have been in her 90s, and she hadn't decided where she was going to live. And I was on the couch. She was next to me. Her husband is rattling away in the bed, and
mm,
we had a conversation. I asked specific questions because I wanted him to hear. I assumed that he could. I always assume that he can. And
mhm,
she made the decision while she was sitting there. Maybe she'd made it before, but she said it out loud. I'm going to live in Houston. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. That man died that afternoon. And he had been hanging and hanging and hanging. And I make up that he needed to hear that she
yeah.
was going to be taken care
It
of.
was gonna be okay. Yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
was the
So
plan.
he didn't go away and come back like we were just talking about, but he was away, but he was listening, and then
Yeah,
he sunk down and went. But there is this movement that happens, and it's fun. I think it's fun. I think it's fun to track, just to
mhm,
see, as you say, it's I need a little bit more sunshine before I go, or I want a little bit more sunshine, or somebody comes in the room and there's an upwelling of energy so that eyes can open and a little bit of movement of a hand, and they haven't been able to do that in a while.
yeah.
Um,
That happened with my husband.
yeah.
He came at lunchtime at one day where we had there nothing had been happening, like no interaction for days, and she
Yes.
just popped up, said, "I love you." Well, I think it was
Oh,
the last thing. I was
yeah.
in I mean, your heart's everybody
Beautiful.
I mean, I don't know, my heart's breaking open, and it's just this beautiful moment, like, it felt like she really wanted to just make sure he knew that, and
Yeah.
not that she loved everybody in her family, but there was something between the 2 of them that just was very, very special. I mean, he was her primary caregiver, and they lived so close to each other for such a long time.
Yeah.
They just had this bond.
Yeah. Really special bond. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It was interesting too, because afterwards, so the day that she passed was funny. So I had gotten up early to go to a doctor's appointment, and we, the nurses there were like, "Okay, let us know if anything's changing," because they absolutely they enjoyed my presence for
Oh,
2 weeks
fun.
because they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"You understand, you get your you have like,
Yes.
they're usually explaining so much, and we were having these very like metaphysical conversations together. It was beautiful. And anyway, so she called first thing in the morning, and I got there first for about an hour before anybody else got there, and just I don't know why, but singing felt like I
Mm.
just sang to her, and it just felt like, again, this kind of rich. I did Again, I have no training. This is just out of the gut what's coming. It's like creating this ritual where, again, it's safe and beautiful, and that we honor her in a way that also gives her permission to go. Well, then everybody else came. She's holding on, holding on, holding on. And the nurse came back in, I don't know, a little bit before dinner. She's like, "Why don't you guys go? Because maybe she doesn't want to go while you're all here." We left. We went, took like a little dinner break, and I said, "You know what? She doesn't. I just from her personality as a human, I was like, she doesn't like all that. This is my feeling anyway. All that attention." So by the time we all came back, she had like in that little dinner window, she had
Yeah.
left. And I
Yeah.
said to her when I saw her, like after, so we went on to say goodbye, and I said, "Look," I said, "just let me know you're at peace somewhere. I just want to know." Nothing you don't have to, nothing fancy, what have you, what have you, what have you. Like 2 days later, I'm out walking in the woods with my dog. I see this like flashy, like bright thing kind of catch my eye in the woods. And I look down and it's like a soda can, but it wasn't a soda can. And it said peace, Peace on it. And it was some kind of iced tea. I never heard of peace iced tea.
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, "Thank you for letting us know, or me know, right, that, you're at peace." I just wanted some kind of sign that she was kind of settled
Beautiful.
wherever she was. And it was such a beautiful thing. Now, my husband has asked her for some signs, and he hasn't quite gotten it exactly yet, which is fine. I find she comes to me now all the time with a country music song or something else through it. But I also found, and Martha Jo, I'm really curious what you think about this. I also found that some of her energy, when people transition,
Mhm.
some of her energy or things that were unresolved, maybe like seem like they maybe transferred to me, or like almost like bags at the airport, right?
Oh, interesting.
She was, yeah, she was getting on the plane or whatever, and the bags were there. She's like, "All right, Stacey, you're now." Like, I don't know if you have any experience with that or what have you.
I
Been working on that the last couple months, but I definitely found there was some kind of like energetic blueprint that she left that seemed to
Interesting.
be, yeah,
So
tied to me.
what do you do with that?
So I have done a variety of things. Anything that doesn't belong to me, I say thank you for sharing with me. But if it doesn't belong, I've actually worked with a healer myself to help do any kind of clearing and anything where whatever she might have transferred that doesn't isn't mine, that I do that, clear that kind of stuff. And then
Right.
recently I felt like she was really trying to kind of come through me, through my energy sources, to
Mhm.
still be close to my husband. And I said to her, "Look, everything that we've done in this bond, because we created this very, very special bond through
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
experience together. It's like, I honor that, I offer you love, but you need to find your own channel
Mhm.
to
That's
connect
not
to
me.
any that, yeah, that isn't me. And if you want it to be me at any point, you need to come in the front door and not like
Mhm.
slide in my energy channels in the back." So anyway, since that, it's been very clear. But I mean, if you have 3 decades, 30 years of experience, I was just curious if you've seen that or you've experienced it where people kind of leave something.
I haven't heard it said quite like that. The conversations that people have with me are more along the lines of what you were talking about, the peace sign showing up, the symbols and things. But I get I mean, the imagery is very clear to me of leaving some things with somebody before they leave.
Right?
Um, and it's what comes up for me is people around the bedside as somebody's leaving, saying, will you tell Uncle Joe I said hello, or tell, somebody that I have a message for somebody. It hadn't occurred to me that there would be something going back the other direction, but that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. It
Yeah.
does make a lot of sense.
It's very, and I am a very open channel, which when
Yeah.
I discovered this mediumship is actually when I was going for my Reiki master, certification is not the right word, but I know you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was practicing Reiki on my husband because he was my practice person. And his uncle that he lost when he was young, who he loved dearly, came through. And I was like, I
Wow.
freaked out. I didn't know what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, but you can't stay because I have no idea what to do. And I ended up maybe a year or so later with somebody, beautiful spiritual advisor that I connected with. And she said, you're a medium, aren't you? And I said, how did you know? I was like, I don't like kind of keeping that quiet.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, I can tell. And she goes, would you like some help with it? And she gave me a lot of like just some support and guidance to kind of get it all kind of in a place where it felt safe to me.
Yeah.
And one of the things she said is she said, you can call out, right? If you like, to your point, like I want to get a message to somebody, but also too, people will come through as well. So it's this, again, it's this very like, I don't know if I'm just a more porous energy that people feel like, oh, here's a bag for you that
It's a,
I haven't quite finished with yet this
yeah.
lifetime. So I'm gonna leave it here instead of taking it onward.
That is an interesting. It's an interesting job. I mean, I hear people with different spiritual gifts that, there's a priest I follow who does some, um, people get stuck and he helps them get unstuck. And it's this
Got it.
really beautiful interaction that he has. It takes two people in present form and they help the person who is stuck get unstuck. And I think about that as a job, a spiritual job, and that they
Yeah,
have somehow
definitely.
found. And I'm listening to you talk about having baggage left. I'm like, that is an interesting spiritual job. That
Yeah,
then what do you help move that somehow? That's kind of
yeah.
cool.
It's very interesting, and I
Yeah. Yeah.
feel I don't know also too because I'm on my own personal like end of like this container that has been punctuated right by well my mother's death was in there that was part of it and now my mother-in-law's like all this kind of death and rebirth and
Sure.
transformation
Sure. Sure.
and it just feels like there's something also really cracking open in me and I'm sure you can't walk through a process like this, right? Even if you are the settled, grounded energy and
Yeah.
not be transformed in some way each time. I don't know. You tell
1,000%.
me, because this is really my first, well, second after my father in law, but it was not as the level of intensity as my mother in law.
I'm with you. I can't imagine that somebody wouldn't go through one of these experiences and have some sort of internal and external shift.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah.
It's a transformational experience all around.
Which makes me want to ask you, this is just me curious, but I'm sure everybody else now listening will be curious too. How did you get into this work? I mean, it's so, I kind of got, Spirit kind of tapped me and said, hey, here, we got this plan for you this year, but I don't know if I would have leaned in otherwise. So I'm so curious what kind of drew you in because most people are so afraid of death and dying that they lean out.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I started my career early at a children's hospital in San Antonio, and I was with kids who were dying and their siblings, and I just loved it. I loved the presence of the experience of it, the no BS. I mean, it was just it was immediately intimate and real, and it was a way that I could connect with people, um, and sometimes had difficulty connecting with people in other situations. And for whatever reason, that was an easier and intriguing and powerful place. So I did that. My brother died unexpectedly when I was 24. And then I went back to do the hospital work more and now had this personal experience and as well as the professional experience. And I was still really young, but that shifted things for me. And I went back to school and got some more training and opened a children's bereavement center in San Antonio and got to be around kids and dying and grief for a long time, really immersed in that and learned so much. It was a really great experience. And from there, tended people who were dying, did some internship work in my master's in doctoral studies and took care of my parents and then got to work at Abode, which has been a seminal experience for me. Abode is a hospice house here in San Antonio and ran that for a few years. And what was so great about that is in regular hospice, you pop in and out. You're there, you go back the next week, you're there for an hour. At Abode, we were with them very intensely and intentionally, 3 weeks, sometimes 3 months, but we really got to know them and got to watch the trajectory of the dying experience, watch them move into the places where they begin to have, we call them extraordinary experiences. I think they're ordinary, getting to see people who come to be with them and listen to the language of dying and really get an experience of that in a way that I couldn't have gotten had I not been immersed. And it was a really, really great training ground. And gosh, so many beautiful, beautiful people.
So your D school, your death and dying school, if I'm saying that correctly, are
Yeah, yeah.
you helping people? I'm so curious. Are you helping people be more comfortable leaning into being around some like be holding space for
Yeah.
somebody that they love dying? Or is it people who are just like you're interested in serving? And I'm so curious.
It's all the things.
Okay.
There are people who have had deaths and they want to understand more about what happened. They want to have a place to lean in and talk about these things. There are people who are going to be caring for parents and they want to have a better sense of that. There are people who are facing their own mortality and they want to have a sense of that. And then people who have had not a drop of experience around end of life, and some of those people have shown up. So it's this wide range, mostly women. We have had some men, but mostly women. And my thinking behind D School is, we're all going to die. We're going to take care of people we love. And often we don't feel empowered around that. And I would like for people to feel more empowered around it and have some knowing and affirmation about what they've already done or affirmation about what they know. Yeah. We're moving into a time in the United States where we have baby boomers who are going to be at an age where they're going to be on hospice in the next 15, 20 years. Yeah. We're not equipped in our country to deal with that at present. I hope that we're going to have some things come into play. I think death doulas are going to be something that are part of insurance in the coming years. But ultimately, we're going to be taking care of each other. And I just would love for people to have a little bit more ease around that. And if you and I are neighbors, you can call me and I'll come help you, or I'll come help a family member. If something comes up, you'll know, like you did, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, there's somebody in the neighborhood who knows about this stuff, and we'll call them in and they'll help us and they'll teach us. So we'll know how to do this different next time. Yeah. That's how we used to do it. And we're going to need to do some of that again. And it's another way of being in community, and it's a beautiful way of being in a community.
I completely agree, because I thought, if this were me, I mean, you can't help but think of your own mortality when you're like, I don't know, to me, touching death made me feel more alive than
Yes.
There's an aliveness to death that I know sounds, well, probably not to you, but if it's somebody else listening, it's like, what is Stacey talking about today? Paradoxical or incongruent, but it does. There's this light. You're like, if you took like a electrical wire and you cut and it's like sparking, that's what it felt like. You're so in this life energy. And I just remember thinking, like, what could be the most sacred way, because we don't, right? We don't really, and to your point, with all the numbers and the growing and everything else, it's like, I actually have several clients who are end of life doulas. They've been teaching me for years about what all of
Good.
this is. And I'm like, this is, I'm with you. I'm like, everybody needs this in community, because again, there is so much fear. There's so much fear. And then again, can we lean into whatever? I'm all about the truth and the messiness of life. So it's like, whether it's death or something else, how
Yeah.
can we be in it in a way it doesn't sink us or, drown us, but in a way that we can, I love the word you used earlier, like feel empowered to navigate.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you find, if you had, and I don't know if you'll have an answer for this, but do you find that like is there a general thing that when people come out of D school that they feel like, if there was an essence, right? Like, this is what kind of being in this experience helped me with. Do people say similar things, or it's very much, I'm just, because that
It,
to me is like, the how do you deal with the fear? Like, that was my
yeah.
biggest thing.
The conversation is often just what you were talking about aliveness, that I thought I was going to come in and it was going to be all doom and gloom and about death and dying. And I was going to, be really sad all the time. And there's a thing that happens where all these individuals come in as individuals. They begin to talk with each other. We begin to talk about the experience of dying, what that means, how that's impacted them before. Then they move a little bit into their own grief experiences, or a lot into them. And there's a lot of tools given. There's a lot of freedom given for people to feel how they need to feel and to connect with each other. And by about the fourth or fifth session, I'm usually chewing my fingernails on the fourth session, wondering if this is going to be the one. Something happens that the community comes together. It's happened every time we've done it, and in that coming together, there is I'll use your metaphor about a spark or electricity that is different and sometimes ineffable. Um, it's a layer of learning about ourselves, what's going to happen to us, how we care for other people, how we can care for other people, and that this is all part of the goodness of living. It's at the tail end of living, but it's still part of living.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. And once people get over the preconceived ideas about what the conversations are going to be or what dying looks like. I show lots of videos and conversations of people who are in process. You see people kind of take a breath and sit back in their chair, and then the questions start, and it's a generative place. It's a place of generative energy, and it's really something. Everyone is different, and I'm nervous before I do everyone, and then I'm always happy when I'm in the middle of it. It's pretty great.
Well, that is, well, you're holding such space, right? Because you're
Yeah.
right. People are coming in with their own fear, expect whatever they think it is, and most of us, I don't know, my family, we don't really. I mean, people talk about the practical matters of things, but they don't really
Yeah.
talk about the actual, like,
Feelings.
again,
Yeah.
exactly. They're like, wait, there's a feeling involved. No, we'll pretend that that doesn't exist.
Right.
And so it's just, you get to meet yourself in the truth of
Yes.
whatever it is versus whatever worry or fear, whatever somebody else has projected on you too, right? That you've now thought, oh my gosh. I mean, we had a family member on my side of the family. I think it was my great grandfather who died suddenly, like in his early 50s. And so my grandfather, my father, everybody's like, I'm going to die young. I'm going to, right? This fear walking around, like
Oh,
when they went over whatever the 50, whatever the age
yes.
was, they were all like,
Yes.
thought that, oh my gosh, right? There was this, like, you could feel it was so
Yes.
palpable
Yes.
around that. So meeting things like that and saying, okay, that was that person's experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that that belongs to me or that's going to be what happens to me.
Yeah. And
Allowing that uniqueness.
that's real. That all of those things can exist at the same time, and we can give voice to all of it and hold it
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
The and, my favorite thing, the
Yeah.
and.
Yeah.
Martha Jo, this has been delightful, right? Talking about death and dying, very, very
Good.
delightful. and so insightful. Thank you. I can feel your energy. I could just imagine being in a place where you walk in and just because it just, I know everybody's going to be listening. It's like, oh, that was really calming and just
Oh, good.
peaceful. So just thank you
Good.
for bringing that to all of us as well. And if people want to find you or they want to know more about this D school that I asked you about, where can they get the hookup?
MarthaAtkins.com, Atkins. New website's going to be up here pretty soon, so I'm excited about that. But there's a link on there for D School, and registration for D School is open through February, first part of
Awesome.
February. So, yeah,
Yeah, and if you're curious or you just want to be in Martha Joe's world, I'll put all her social media links as well too, so you can
join me on
follow and
Facebook. Yep,
connect and
and some
do all
pictures of
those.
dogs. I put up lots of pictures of dogs.
Oh,
Talk
well,
about
we
serious
are
things and
also.
dogs.
Hey, there's never been a dog photo or what have you that I have not enjoyed. So
Okay, good.
I love that. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for asking me. It's been a delight, Stacey. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in. Get all the delicious details and links we've mentioned in this episode in the show notes below. If you'd like to chat about this episode or learn more about how to work with me, come visit me in my private Facebook group, Everyday Enchantment, or check out my website, staceyandon.com, where you can find out more about my Leap of Faith coaching, my Map Makers group program, and the School of Intuitive Magic. Plus a special shout out for all the production and editing of this show by Richard Wilmore. That's it for now, love. Here's to living a life enchanted. See you soon.